The gentle breeze that perpetually rustled the leaves of the ancient oak tree in Eleanor Ainsworth's front yard carried with it the faint scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. The quintessential aroma of a summer afternoon in Harmony Creek. Eleanor, a woman who had seen more than 7 decades paint their fleeting hues across the canvas of her life, sat on the porch swing, its rhythmic creak a familiar counterpoint to the chirping of crickets hidden in the tall grass. Her hands, gnarled and bearing the subtle roadmap of time, were clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the undulating green hills met the soft, hazy blue of the sky. Harmony Creek was a town that lived up to its name, a place where life unfolded at a languid pace, where the biggest excitement might be Mrs. Gable's prize-winning zucchini at the annual county fair, and where everyone knew everyone else's stories, or at least thought they did. Eleanor was a beloved figure in Harmony Creek, known for her gentle smile, her unwavering kindness, and the freshly baked apple pies she often delivered to neighbors in need. She was the embodiment of a quintessential grandmother, her days filled with tending her small garden, reading well-worn novels, and occasionally knitting scarves that always seemed to find their way to the local charity drive. Her late husband, Arthur, had been the town's doctor for over 40 years, a man whose quiet wisdom and comforting presence had been a cornerstone of the community. Since his passing 5 years ago, Eleanor had continued to live in their modest 2-story house, her independence a testament to her quiet resilience, though the absence of his steady presence was a constant, gentle ache in her heart. In the tapestry of Harmony Creek's social fabric, Eleanor occupied a comfortable, albeit somewhat unassuming position. She was respected for her age and her past connection to the town's beloved doctor, but she was also often regarded with a certain gentle indulgence, a feeling that she was a bit out of touch with the modern world. Her questions about newfangled gadgets often elicited patient explanations from younger residents, and her occasional confusion over current events was met with kind smiles and simplified summaries. It wasn't that Eleanor was unintelligent. Rather, her interests lay in the quieter rhythms of life, in the timeless beauty of nature, and the enduring wisdom found within the pages of a good book. Firearms, with their inherent power and often violent purpose, were a subject that rarely, if ever, crossed her mind. Her knowledge of them was limited to what she had gleaned from old Western movies, a romanticized and largely inaccurate portrayal that held little connection to the reality of modern weaponry. The most interaction Eleanor had ever had with a real gun was many years ago, shortly after she and Arthur had moved to Harmony Creek. A stray dog had been causing trouble in her garden, and Arthur, a man of practicality rather than violence, had borrowed an old shotgun from a neighbor to scare it away. Eleanor remembered the weight of the weapon when he had briefly shown it to her, the cold, unyielding feel of the metal, and the faint smell of oil that had clung to it. The experience had left her feeling more uneasy than empowered, a sense that such an object held a potential for harm that she preferred to keep at arm's length. Since then, firearms had remained firmly outside the sphere of her everyday life, a concept as foreign to her gentle existence as advanced astrophysics or competitive extreme sports. In the quiet tranquility of Harmony Creek, such things seemed distant and largely irrelevant to the simple joys and occasional sorrows that marked the passage of time. Eleanor was content in her unassuming role, a kind, elderly woman living a peaceful life, unaware that beneath her gentle exterior lay a history that would one day surprise and perhaps even astound the residents of Harmony Creek. Life in Harmony Creek, while typically serene, occasionally offered pockets of youthful exuberance, often centered around the local high school and its various extracurricular activities. Among the more enthusiastic groups were a handful of young adults, mostly recent graduates or those taking a gap year before heading off to college, who shared a common interest in outdoor sports and occasionally organized informal gatherings for activities like hiking, fishing, and more recently, amateur target shooting. This particular group, consisting of Mark, a lanky and jovial young man who often took on the role of unofficial leader; Sarah, a bright and energetic girl with a contagious laugh; David, a quiet and thoughtful fellow with a knack for mechanical things; and Emily, a bubbly and friendly artist with a penchant for capturing the town's scenic beauty through her paintings, had recently discovered a shared fascination with firearms, viewing it as a novel and somewhat challenging recreational pursuit. Their interest had been sparked by Mark's grandfather, a retired police officer who owned a small collection of rifles and shotguns and had offered to teach them the basics of gun safety and marksmanship at a makeshift range set up on a secluded patch of private land just outside of town. The grandfather, a stickler for safety protocols, had emphasized the importance of responsible gun ownership and had patiently guided the youngsters through the fundamentals of handling, loading, aiming, and firing various types of firearms. Initially, their practice sessions had been tentative and marked by a fair amount of nervous laughter and missed targets. However, as they gained familiarity and a degree of proficiency, their enthusiasm grew, and the shooting sessions became a regular fixture in their weekend routines. As the next weekend approached, Mark and Sarah were discussing their upcoming shooting practice over coffee at the local diner. They were brainstorming ways to make the session more interesting, perhaps by setting up different types of targets or trying out some slightly more challenging shooting drills. David and Emily joined their conversation, offering their own suggestions. It was Emily who first brought up the idea of inviting Eleanor Ainsworth to come and watch. "You know, Mrs. Ainsworth might enjoy seeing what we're up to," she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "She's always so kind and interested in what everyone in town is doing." Mark and Sarah exchanged glances, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. While they had nothing against Eleanor, the idea of her observing their somewhat rough-and-tumble shooting practice seemed a little odd. They pictured the gentle elderly woman, more accustomed to tending her roses than handling firearms, looking on with a mixture of confusion and perhaps even disapproval. David, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. Well, her husband, Dr. Ainsworth, was always a respected member of the community. Inviting her might be a nice gesture, a way of showing her that we appreciate her and remember him. Sarah, always the most socially conscious of the group, agreed. "That's a good point, David. It would be a polite thing to do. We don't have to pressure her to try shooting or anything. She can just watch if she wants." Mark, though still a little hesitant, nodded in agreement. "All right, let's invite her. It's the neighborly thing to do, I guess." And so, the decision was made. Later that day, Sarah, armed with a freshly baked batch of cookies, walked over to Eleanor's house to extend the invitation, completely unaware of the surprising history that lay dormant beneath the gentle exterior of the kindly old woman. Eleanor, her heart warmed by Sarah's thoughtful gesture and the delicious aroma of the freshly baked cookies, graciously accepted the invitation to watch the young people's shooting practice. The idea of spending a pleasant afternoon outdoors, observing the youthful energy of her neighbors, appealed to her quiet nature. She had always enjoyed the company of the younger generation, finding their enthusiasm for life a refreshing contrast to the slower pace of her own days. On the appointed Saturday afternoon, Eleanor, dressed in a comfortable floral dress and her trusty gardening hat to shield her from the sun, made her way to the secluded patch of land just outside Harmony Creek, where Mark's grandfather had set up the makeshift shooting range. The young group greeted her warmly, offering her a comfortable folding chair in the shade of a large oak tree, a safe distance from the firing line. They were eager to show off their newfound skills, and Mark immediately began explaining the safety rules and the different types of rifles they would be using. Eleanor listened attentively, her gentle smile never wavering, occasionally asking simple, seemingly naive questions that belied the keen observations she was making. When Mark offered her a closer look at a modern bolt-action rifle, Eleanor accepted with a slight hesitation, her eyes widening slightly as she took the weapon in her hands. It felt surprisingly heavy, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of the sun on her skin. She turned it over slowly, her brow furrowing in apparent confusion. "Oh my goodness," she said in a soft, slightly tremulous voice. "It looks ever so complicated. All these knobs and levers. I haven't seen anything quite like this since, well, never, really." Sarah giggled good-naturedly. "Don't worry, Mrs. Ainsworth. It's not as complicated as it looks. Mark's grandpa has been teaching us all about it." David stepped forward to point out the different parts of the rifle, patiently explaining the function of the bolt, the magazine, and the scope. Eleanor listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking follow-up questions that seemed to stem from genuine curiosity rather than any prior knowledge. "And this little window thingy on top?" she asked, pointing to the scope with a slightly shaky finger. "That's for making things look bigger, is it? So you can see the target better?" Trent, who had joined the group a little later, couldn't resist a small, condescending smirk. "Yeah, Mrs. Ainsworth, it's a scope. Helps you hit the target even if you can't see it very well." He exchanged a quick glance with Emily, who tried to hide a smile. Eleanor, seemingly oblivious to Trent's subtle jab, simply nodded thoughtfully. "Oh, I see. Very clever indeed. It must take a very steady hand to use one of those, I imagine. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, you know. Getting on in years, I am." She offered a self-deprecating chuckle, further reinforcing the impression of a kindly but somewhat frail elderly woman out of her element. As the young people took turns firing at the paper targets set up downrange, Eleanor watched with a polite but somewhat distant interest. She occasionally commented on their progress, offering words of encouragement and feigned surprise at their occasional bullseyes. But beneath her gentle exterior, her mind was working, her eyes taking in every detail of their stances, their breathing, their trigger control. The years may have added lines to her face and slowed her gait, but they had not dulled the sharp observational skills honed by years of experience under far more demanding circumstances. Skills that remained hidden beneath the carefully constructed facade of a slightly bewildered old woman. The afternoon at the makeshift shooting range continued in a leisurely fashion. The young people taking turns firing at the paper targets, their shots occasionally hitting the bullseye, eliciting cheers and playful banter. Eleanor sat comfortably in her folding chair, offering occasional words of encouragement and sipping on a bottle of water that Sarah had thoughtfully provided. The sun was beginning to dip slightly in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the surrounding trees, creating a peaceful, almost idyllic setting. Mark had recently introduced a new element to their practice sessions, a remote-controlled target shaped like a small boar. This target moved erratically across a designated path, adding a dynamic challenge to their shooting skills. It was currently David's turn to try his hand at hitting the moving target. He took careful aim with his rifle, tracking the small boar as it zipped across the clearing. He fired a couple of shots, narrowly missing each time, the target's unpredictable movements proving more challenging than the stationary paper targets. Suddenly, as the boar target reached the far end of its designated path, the remote control in Mark's hand began to malfunction. Instead of stopping and turning as programmed, the small motorized target veered sharply to the left, accelerating at an alarming speed. It careened off its intended course, heading directly towards a thicket of trees that marked the edge of the clearing, beyond the established safe zone. Mark frantically pressed buttons on the remote, his face etched with concern. But the target continued its erratic trajectory, its small motor whirring loudly. "Whoa, what's going on?" Sarah exclaimed, her eyes wide with surprise as she watched the rogue target. "Mark, can you stop it?" Mark shook his head, his fingers flying over the controls. "I don't know. The remote's not responding." David lowered his rifle, his focus now entirely on the runaway target. "It's heading for the woods." If it gets in there, we'll never find it. Trent, ever the impulsive one, suggested, "Someone should just shoot it." But Mark quickly countered, "No, we can't just start firing randomly. There could be animals or people in those woods." The situation was escalating quickly. The small, erratically moving target, now off course and out of control, presented a potential hazard. If it somehow managed to escape the clearing, there was no telling where it might end up. And the idea of a small, motorized boar whizzing through the surrounding woods was slightly absurd but also potentially concerning. The young people, initially amused by the malfunctioning remote, were now starting to feel a sense of unease. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do next, their earlier confidence in their shooting abilities momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected challenge. Eleanor, who had been watching the scene unfold with a quiet intensity, subtly shifted her position in her chair, her previously relaxed demeanor replaced by a barely perceptible alertness. The small motorized boar continued its reckless sprint, veering further away from the designated shooting range and heading directly towards the dense tree line. Mark was still fumbling with the unresponsive remote control, his frustration mounting with each passing second. The other young people exchanged worried glances, their earlier amusement completely gone. The situation, though not dire, had an air of escalating absurdity, and the potential for the runaway target to cause some minor damage or simply disappear into the woods was growing increasingly likely. Suddenly, a movement from the shaded area where Eleanor had been sitting drew everyone's attention. With a surprising agility that belied her age, Eleanor rose from her folding chair. Her previously relaxed posture had vanished, replaced by a focused intensity that seemed to emanate from her very core. Without a word, she approached the group, her gaze fixed on David, who was still holding his rifle, looking uncertainly at the fleeing target. "Excuse me, young man," Eleanor said, her voice now firm and steady, a far cry from the slightly tremulous tone she had used earlier. She extended her hand towards the rifle. "May I?" David, caught off guard by her sudden change in demeanor, instinctively handed her the weapon. Eleanor took the rifle with a decisive grip, her movements economical and purposeful. The earlier clumsiness she had feigned was nowhere to be seen. The young people watched in stunned silence as Eleanor smoothly checked the rifle's safety, her fingers moving with a familiarity that hinted at a long and intimate acquaintance with firearms. She then quickly but methodically adjusted the scope, her eye pressed against the eyepiece with a focus that seemed to exclude everything else. The gentle, somewhat vague expression that had characterized her face earlier had sharpened, replaced by a keen, almost hawk-like intensity. Trent, forgetting his earlier condescension, blurted out, "Mrs. Ainsworth, what are you doing?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately, her attention completely absorbed by the task at hand. She raised the rifle, her stance surprisingly steady for a woman of her age, her prosthetic leg providing an unexpected anchor. She tracked the erratically moving boar target for a brief moment, her breathing shallow and controlled. The young people held their breath, their earlier amusement and skepticism completely forgotten. There was something about Eleanor's focused intensity, the way she handled the rifle with such assuredness, that suggested she was far more capable than they had initially assumed. The frail old woman who had seemed so out of her element just moments before had transformed into someone else entirely, her actions hinting at a hidden competence that was both surprising and strangely compelling. They watched, captivated, wondering what she was about to do, their previous assumptions about the kindly old lady from Harmony Creek beginning to crumble like dry leaves in the autumn wind. The silence that had fallen over the makeshift shooting range was broken by a sharp crack, the sound of the rifle echoing through the quiet clearing. Eleanor remained perfectly still for a moment, the rifle held firmly against her shoulder, the faint scent of gunpowder drifting in the air. Then, She slowly lowered the weapon, a subtle air of satisfaction playing on her lips. All eyes turned towards the runaway boar target, which had been sprinting erratically just moments before. It now lay motionless on the ground, a small puff of dust still lingering in the air above it. A single precise shot had struck the small motorized target directly in its control mechanism, rendering it instantly inert. A collective gasp escaped the lips of the young onlookers. They stared in stunned silence at the fallen target, then back at Eleanor, who now stood calmly holding the rifle, her earlier intensity slowly fading, replaced by a gentle, almost grandmotherly smile. The transformation they had witnessed in the span of a few moments was nothing short of astonishing. The frail, seemingly clueless old woman had suddenly revealed a level of skill and precision that none of them had imagined possible. Mark was the first to break the silence, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. "Mrs. Ainsworth, did you just hit that?" Sarah, her eyes wide, echoed his astonishment. "But it was moving so fast, and it was so far away." David, who had offered Eleanor his rifle, simply shook his head in stunned silence, his gaze fixed on the fallen target as if trying to understand the physics-defying shot he had just witnessed. Even Trent, the ever-skeptical one, stood speechless, his earlier condescending smirk completely gone, replaced by an expression of utter bewilderment. Eleanor chuckled softly, the sound gentle and unassuming. "Well, dear," she said, her voice regaining its usual soft tone, "it wouldn't do to have it running off into the woods, now would it? Might get lost and scare the local wildlife." She then carefully handed the rifle back to David. "A fine weapon you have there, young man. Well maintained, I can see." The young people continued to stare at her, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The image of the seemingly frail elderly woman transforming into a crack shot in the blink of an eye was almost surreal. They had underestimated her so completely, their assumptions based on her age and gentle demeanor proving to be spectacularly wrong. The casual jokes and condescending remarks they had made earlier now felt incredibly foolish, a stark reminder that appearances could indeed be deceiving. The haven of Harmony Creek, usually so predictable and familiar, had just presented them with a profound and unexpected lesson, courtesy of the quiet, unassuming woman they thought they knew so well. The stunned silence that had descended upon the shooting range was finally broken by a voice, older and slightly raspy, carrying a note of surprised recognition. "Eleanor, is that really you, Eleanor Ainsworth?" All heads turned towards the sound, their attention now focused on an elderly man who was slowly approaching the group. He was a familiar figure in Harmony Creek, Mr. Abernathy, a retired farmer who had known Eleanor and her late husband for decades. He walked with a slight limp, his face etched with the wrinkles of time and countless seasons spent under the sun. But his eyes, though aged, held a sharp and knowing glint. Eleanor turned to Mr. Abernathy, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Why, good afternoon, Thomas," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "It's been a while. What brings you out this way?" Mr. Abernathy chuckled, his gaze flicking from Eleanor to the fallen boar target and then back to her again, a look of disbelief and dawning understanding in his eyes. "Well, I heard some shooting going on and thought I'd wander over and see what all the commotion was about. But I must say, Eleanor, I haven't seen a shot like that since the war." The young people looked at each other, their eyebrows raised in confusion. "The war?" Mark asked, a puzzled expression on his face. "What war, Mr. Abernathy?" Mr. Abernathy turned to the youngsters, a nostalgic look in his eyes. "Why, the conflict back in the late 70s, son. The one that wasn't talked about much." Eleanor's husband, Arthur, God rest his soul, served as a medic. But Eleanor had a different role to play. He turned back to Eleanor, his voice filled with a quiet respect. "That was a fine shot, Eleanor. Just like old times." Eleanor's gentle smile remained, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse of a life long past. The young people watched, their curiosity piqued. They had never heard anything about Eleanor being involved in any war. She had always seemed like such a peaceful, unassuming woman. "What do you mean, Mr. Abernathy?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. "What did Eleanor do in the war?" Mr. Abernathy took a deep breath, his gaze drifting back to the fallen target. "Well, these young folks here probably won't believe it, but Eleanor here, she was one of the best sharpshooters our side had. They called her Whisper, because you never heard her coming, and you certainly never saw her miss." He turned back to Eleanor, a knowing look in his eyes. "That shot you just made, Eleanor, that was a Whisper special, wasn't it?" Eleanor finally nodded, her gentle smile widening slightly. "Old habits die hard, Thomas," she said softly, a hint of her younger self momentarily shining through her aged features. The jaws of the young onlookers dropped in unison. The kindly old lady they thought they knew was actually a legendary military sniper. The quiet tranquility of Harmony Creek had just revealed a secret that had been hidden for decades. Mr. Abernathy's revelation hung in the air, painting Eleanor in a completely new light for the astonished young people. The gentle, slightly vague demeanor they had associated with her now seemed like a carefully drawn veil, concealing a history of extraordinary skill and quiet bravery. The name Whisper resonated with an almost mythical quality, evoking images of a silent, unseen force capable of delivering lethal precision from a distance. Their minds raced, trying to reconcile the kindly old lady who baked apple pies with the legendary sniper Mr. Abernathy had described. The scene around them seemed to fade as Eleanor's eyes glazed over, a faint smile touching her lips as she was momentarily transported back to a different time, a different life. The quiet clearing of Harmony Creek dissolved into the harsh, unforgiving landscape of a war-torn country. The gentle breeze replaced by the biting wind, carrying the scent of dust and distant gunfire. She saw herself, a much younger Eleanor, barely out of her teens, but with a focus and determination that belied her age. Her movements were fluid and purposeful as she meticulously cleaned and prepared her rifle, each action performed with the practiced ease of someone who had spent countless hours honing their craft. The heavy weight of the sniper rifle in her hands felt familiar and comforting, not the foreign object she had pretended it to be earlier. This was more than just a weapon. It was an extension of her will, a tool that allowed her to protect and defend. She remembered the rigorous training, the endless hours spent practicing her aim, learning to control her breathing, to feel the subtle shifts in the wind, to calculate distances with uncanny accuracy. She had been a natural, her keen eyesight and unwavering nerves making her a formidable presence on the battlefield. The call sign Whisper had been earned not just for her silent approach, but also for the almost imperceptible sound of her shots, often masked by the chaos of battle, leaving the enemy unaware of the danger until it was too late. She recalled missions where her steady hand and sharp eye had made the difference between life and death, where her precise shots had neutralized threats and saved the lives of her fellow soldiers. There was a fierce protectiveness that had driven her, a deep-seated sense of duty that had compelled her to excel in a role that demanded not only exceptional skill, but also immense mental fortitude. She remembered the camaraderie she had shared with her fellow snipers, the unspoken understanding and mutual respect that existed between them. They were a unique breed, these long-range marksmen, operating in the shadows, their contributions often unseen, but always vital. They relied on each other, their lives sometimes depending on the skill and judgment of the person watching their back from a distant vantage point. The faces of her fallen comrades flashed through her mind, young men and women who had paid the ultimate price for their service. It was for them that she had honed her skills, for them that she had taken on the burden of her deadly profession. The memories were bittersweet, tinged with sadness, but also with a sense of pride in the role she had played. The gentle sunlight filtering through the leaves of the oak tree in Harmony Creek gradually brought Eleanor back to the present. The harsh landscapes and echoes of gunfire faded, replaced by the quiet wonder on the faces of the young people watching her. The woman who had once been Whisper, the silent guardian, was now simply Eleanor Ainsworth. The kindly old lady from Harmony Creek, her extraordinary past, a secret finally brought to light. The silence that followed Mr. Abernathy's revelation stretched, thick with disbelief and a dawning sense of their own profound ignorance. The young people who had so readily categorized Eleanor as a kindly but somewhat out-of-touch old lady now stood humbled in the presence of a living legend. The casual condescension they had so easily doled out just moments before felt like a sharp, stinging slap in the face, a stark reminder of the dangers of judging a book by its cover. Mark, the self-proclaimed leader of their group, was the first to stammer out a response, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a look of utter astonishment. "Mrs. Ainsworth." "Whisper?" he repeated, the name sounding almost mythical on his lips. He glanced at his friends, their faces mirroring his own shock and disbelief. The image of Eleanor gently offering them cookies now clashed sharply with the picture of a lethal sniper Mr. Abernathy had painted. Sarah, her earlier giggles now replaced by a quiet embarrassment, stepped forward hesitantly. We had no idea," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She remembered her own good-natured amusement at Eleanor's feigned confusion over the rifle, and a wave of shame washed over her. The kindness and patience Eleanor had shown them now seemed all the more remarkable in light of her hidden past. David, usually the most reserved of the group, simply shook his head in silent wonder. He recalled the easygoing explanations he had offered Eleanor about the rifle, the almost patronizing tone he might have inadvertently used. The thought that he had been explaining the basics of a firearm to someone who had likely mastered its use decades ago was both comical and deeply humbling. Trent, whose earlier mockery had been the most blatant, stood frozen, his face a mask of mortification. The nickname One Leg Riley, which had so easily rolled off his tongue during the Founders' Day air show, now felt like a cruel and insensitive barb aimed at someone who had likely faced far greater challenges and dangers in her youth than he could ever imagine. The memory of his condescending remarks about the rifle's scope now burned with a fiery shame. He avoided Eleanor's gaze, the weight of his own prejudice pressing down on him. Emily, ever the most empathetic of the group, felt a pang of guilt for her silent amusement at Eleanor's initial display of unfamiliarity with the gun. She had seen the other's subtle mockery and had done nothing to stop it, content to remain a passive observer. Now, witnessing the revelation of Eleanor's extraordinary past, she felt a deep sense of regret for not having been more sensitive and respectful. The realization dawned upon them that they had completely misjudged Eleanor, allowing their assumptions based on her age and gentle appearance to blind them to the incredible depth and richness of her life experiences. The quiet, unassuming woman they thought they knew was so much more than they had ever imagined. Her past filled with bravery, skill, and a level of resilience they could only begin to comprehend. The tranquil setting of their amateur shooting range had suddenly become a place of profound learning, a stark reminder that true strength and remarkable histories often reside in the most unexpected of people. The haven of Harmony Creek, which had always seemed so predictable, had just unveiled a hidden chapter, and the young people stood humbled, finally beginning to understand the true depth and quiet dignity of their neighbor, Eleanor Ainsworth. The stunned silence that had enveloped the clearing after Mr. Abernathy's revelation began to dissipate, replaced by a low murmur of awe and a palpable sense of remorse emanating from the young group. They stood awkwardly, shuffling their feet and avoiding Eleanor's gaze, the weight of their earlier condescension now heavy in the air. The image of the frail, unassuming old woman they had teased just moments ago had been shattered, replaced by the formidable figure of Whisper, the legendary sniper. Eleanor, however, seemed unfazed by the sudden shift in their perception of her. She watched them with the same gentle kindness that had characterized her demeanor throughout the afternoon. There was no hint of anger or resentment in her eyes, no trace of the hurt their careless remarks might have caused. She simply stood there, a faint, almost wistful smile playing on her lips, as if reminiscing about a life lived long ago. Finally, Mark, gathering his courage, stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mrs. Ainsworth." "Eleanor," he began hesitantly, the use of her first name feeling strangely formal and yet somehow more respectful now. We are so sorry. We had absolutely no idea. We were really stupid and disrespectful." His apology was heartfelt, the sincerity evident in his voice. Sarah nodded emphatically, her eyes filled with genuine regret. "Yes, absolutely. We judged you so unfairly. We were so caught up in our own ignorance. Your shot was incredible. We can't even imagine what you must have done." Her voice trailed off, unable to fully grasp the extent of Eleanor's hidden past. Trent, looking thoroughly ashamed, mumbled a barely audible apology. "Yeah, sorry, Mrs. Ainsworth. I didn't mean anything by, you know." He couldn't bring himself to repeat the unkind words he had uttered earlier, the memory of them now a source of acute discomfort. Eleanor listened patiently, her gaze soft and understanding. When they had finished their stammered apologies, she let out a gentle sigh. Now, children," she said, her voice calm and reassuring, the tension in the air beginning to ease slightly. "There's no need to be so hard on yourselves. You didn't know? How could you have? It was a long time ago, another life, it seems." She paused for a moment, her eyes drifting towards the distant horizon. "We all make assumptions about people, don't we? We see what's on the surface and think we know the whole story. But everyone carries their own history within them, experiences that have shaped who they are, things they may choose to share or keep private. It's a good reminder for us all, I think, to be a little more open, a little more understanding." Her words were gentle, filled with a wisdom born from experience. She didn't dwell on their earlier mockery, didn't make them feel any more ashamed than they already did. Instead, she offered them grace and understanding, turning their moment of ignorance into a valuable life lesson. The haven of Harmony Creek, in its quiet way, was fostering a moment of genuine connection and learning, guided by the quiet wisdom of a woman whose past held a strength and depth they were only just beginning to appreciate. The days that followed Mr. Abernathy's impromptu revelation at the shooting range brought a noticeable shift in the way the residents of Harmony Creek interacted with Eleanor Ainsworth. The gentle indifference that had often characterized their greetings was replaced by a newfound warmth and a palpable sense of respect. The knowledge that the unassuming elderly woman who lived quietly in the old Ainsworth house was, in fact, a decorated war veteran and a legendary sniper had resonated deeply within the community, adding a layer of profound depth to the woman they thought they knew. No longer was Eleanor simply the kindly widow of the beloved town doctor. She was now also Whisper, the almost mythical figure Mr. Abernathy had described, a woman who had served her country with extraordinary skill and bravery. The stories Mr. Abernathy shared, piecing together fragments of a time long past, painted a picture of a young Eleanor who was fiercely protective and remarkably adept at her deadly craft. These tales, whispered in hushed tones at the local diner and the post office, quickly spread throughout Harmony Creek, transforming Eleanor in the eyes of her neighbors from a gentle grandmother figure into a quiet heroine. People who had previously offered Eleanor well-meaning but slightly patronizing assistance now approached her with a sense of deference, their conversations tinged with a quiet admiration. Younger residents, who might have once chuckled at her questions about modern technology, now sought her out. Eager to hear snippets of her past, they asked about her experiences during the war. Not with morbid curiosity, but with genuine respect for her service and sacrifice. Eleanor, in her typically humble manner, often demurred, sharing only brief anecdotes, but her eyes would sometimes hold a distant, knowing look that hinted at the incredible experiences she had lived through. Even Trent and his friends, the group of young adults who had initially mocked Eleanor at the shooting range, underwent a significant change in their behavior. They made it a point to offer Eleanor genuine and heartfelt apologies, their earlier arrogance completely replaced by a sheepish humility. They started helping her with chores around her garden, offering to carry heavy items, and always addressing her with a newfound politeness. The lesson they had learned that afternoon about not judging a book by its cover had clearly sunk in, leaving a lasting impact on their interactions with Eleanor, and likely with others in the community as well. The upcoming Founders' Day celebration, which had previously evoked a sense of unease in Eleanor, now held a different kind of anticipation. There were whispers in town about honoring her for her service, perhaps with a small ceremony or a mention during the official program. Eleanor, characteristically, tried to dissuade these suggestions, preferring to remain out of the spotlight. However, the outpouring of respect and admiration from her neighbors was undeniable, a testament to the profound impact the revelation of her past had had on the community. The haven of Harmony Creek, in embracing the fullness of Eleanor's history, had finally offered her a true sense of belonging, recognizing the quiet strength and extraordinary past that had been hidden beneath her unassuming exterior for so many years. The newfound respect that enveloped Eleanor in the wake of the revelation about her past began to manifest in tangible ways. While she still preferred the quiet routines of her garden and her books, she found herself engaging more with the community, the conversations now carrying a different weight, a deeper understanding of the woman beneath the gentle exterior. Among those who were most profoundly affected by the discovery of Eleanor's hidden skills were the young adults who had initially underestimated her at the shooting range. Their embarrassment had quickly morphed into a genuine curiosity and a sincere desire to learn from someone with such an extraordinary and unexpected history. Mark, Sarah, David, and even a somewhat sheepish Trent started to visit Eleanor at her home, initially with hesitant apologies, but soon with more specific requests. They had been amateur enthusiasts of target shooting, viewing it as a casual recreational activity. Now, they had inadvertently encountered a master, someone who had honed their skills under the most demanding and life-threatening circumstances. The realization that they had access to such a wealth of knowledge and experience right in their own small town was both humbling and incredibly exciting. It was Sarah who first broached the subject of learning from Eleanor. One sunny afternoon, as she helped Eleanor with some weeding in her garden, she nervously asked, "Eleanor, Mr. Abernathy mentioned, he said you were a really amazing shot. We were just wondering, would you ever be willing to maybe show us some things? We know we were really insensitive the other day, and we completely understand if you don't want to, but we'd really be honored to learn from you." Eleanor, her hands gently patting the soil around a row of newly planted tomatoes, looked up at Sarah with a thoughtful expression. A soft smile touched her lips. "Well now, Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but with a newfound firmness. "I'm not as young as I used to be, and my hands aren't always as steady as they once were. But I suppose I might have a thing or two to share." The young people's faces lit up with excitement. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor began to hold informal shooting lessons for the group, often at the same makeshift range where their initial, misguided encounter had taken place. Her approach to teaching was patient and methodical, emphasizing the fundamentals of safety, proper stance, breath control, and focus. She didn't dwell on the more lethal aspects of her military training, instead focusing on the discipline and precision required for accurate marksmanship. She showed them how to properly clean and maintain their rifles, explaining the mechanics with a quiet authority that commanded their attention. She taught them different shooting positions, demonstrating a surprising level of physical capability despite her age. She shared tips on how to adjust their sights, how to account for windage, and how to find that perfect moment of stillness before squeezing the trigger. Her instructions were interspersed with anecdotes from her past, not glorifying the violence of war, but illustrating the importance of concentration and the responsibility that came with wielding a firearm. The haven of Harmony Creek had unexpectedly become a classroom, and Eleanor Ainsworth, the quiet old lady, had become their unlikely but immensely respected mentor. As Eleanor's informal shooting lessons continued in Harmony Creek, the young people who had become her students found themselves learning far more than just the mechanics of marksmanship. Eleanor's teachings were subtly interwoven with stories and anecdotes from her time in the military, offering glimpses into a world they had only ever read about in history books or seen in movies. She didn't dwell on the graphic details of combat or glorify the act of taking a life. Instead, she focused on the underlying principles that had made her a successful sniper: unwavering focus, meticulous preparation, and the profound responsibility that came with wielding such power. One sunny afternoon, as they were practicing their breathing techniques, Eleanor shared a story about a mission many years ago, during a time when the stakes were incredibly high. "There was one time," she began, her voice soft and measured, "when our team was pinned down, and the only way out was for me to take out a sentry who had a clear line of sight to our position. The sentry was quite a distance away, and the wind was playing tricks that day, making the shot even more difficult." She paused, her gaze distant as she relived the memory. "I remember lying there for what felt like an eternity, just focusing on my breathing, making sure my sight picture was absolutely perfect. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew that if I let my nerves get the better of me, it could cost all of us our lives." She continued, her voice gaining a slight intensity. "I had to block out everything else: the noise of the battle, the fear for my comrades, even the discomfort of lying still in the dirt for so long. All that mattered was that front sight post, the target, and my breath. It was a moment of absolute focus, a complete merging of mind and body. And when I finally squeezed the trigger, the shot was clean. We made it out that day because of that single, precise shot." The young people listened intently, captivated by her story. It wasn't just about hitting a target. It was about discipline, mental fortitude, and the ability to remain calm and focused under immense pressure. Eleanor emphasized that the same principles applied to target shooting, even if the stakes weren't life or death. "Whether you're aiming at a paper target or something else," she explained, "the key is the same: focus. You have to clear your mind of distractions, control your breathing, and trust your training. It's not just about physical skill, it's about mental discipline." On another occasion, while they were practicing their aiming, Eleanor shared an anecdote about the importance of meticulous preparation. "Before every mission," she recounted, "I would spend hours cleaning and inspecting my rifle, making sure everything was in perfect working order. I would check the scope, adjust the settings, and even test the ammunition to make sure it was consistent. Every detail mattered, because when you only have one shot, you have to make it count. She stressed the importance of taking care of their equipment and understanding its capabilities and limitations. "Your rifle is a tool," she told them, "and like any tool, it needs to be treated with respect and maintained properly if you want it to perform reliably." Through these stories and lessons, Eleanor imparted a wisdom that went far beyond the realm of shooting. She taught them about the importance of focus, discipline, preparation, and responsibility, qualities that would serve them well in all aspects of their lives. The makeshift shooting range in the quiet countryside of Harmony Creek had become more than just a place to practice marksmanship. It had transformed into an unlikely classroom where a group of young people were learning invaluable life lessons from the quiet, unassuming woman who had once been the legendary Whisper. As the weeks passed, the shooting range outside Harmony Creek became a regular meeting place, not just for target practice, but for shared stories and unexpected life lessons, courtesy of Eleanor Ainsworth. The young group, initially driven by a fleeting interest in firearms, found themselves drawn to Eleanor's quiet wisdom and the subtle ways she wove her experiences into her instruction. For Trent, in particular, Eleanor's presence served as a constant, gentle reminder of his own hasty judgment and the shallowness of his initial perceptions. He still felt a pang of shame whenever he recalled his condescending remarks during the Founders' Day air show and his casual mockery at their first encounter. He had readily dismissed Eleanor as a frail old woman, incapable of anything beyond tending her garden and baking pies. The revelation of her past as Whisper, the legendary sniper, had been a profound shock, shattering his preconceived notions and forcing him to confront his own prejudices. He noticed the subtle ways Eleanor interacted with everyone, her kindness and respect extending to all, regardless of their age or perceived capabilities. She never once brought up his past behavior or made him feel singled out for his earlier rudeness. Instead, she treated him with the same gentle understanding she showed to Mark, Sarah, and David, allowing him to learn from his mistake through her example rather than through direct reprimand. This quiet acceptance, in a way, was more impactful than any harsh words could have been. One afternoon, as they were packing up their equipment after a practice session, Trent found himself alone with Eleanor for a few moments. He hesitated, then decided to speak, the words coming out a little awkwardly. "Eleanor," he began, I just wanted to say again that I'm really sorry for the way I acted before. I was a jerk. You've been so kind to us, especially after how I behaved." Eleanor, who was carefully cleaning the lens of her shooting glasses, looked up at him with a soft smile. "Trent, dear," she said, her voice gentle, "we all make mistakes. It's part of being young and learning about the world. The important thing is that you recognize it and try to do better. You can't judge a person's story by just looking at a few pages. Everyone has chapters you haven't read yet." Her words resonated deeply with Trent. He realized that his initial judgment of Eleanor had been based on nothing more than superficial appearances and his own narrow-minded assumptions. He had failed to see the depth and richness of her life experience, allowing his own arrogance to blind him to the truth. The experience with Eleanor had a ripple effect on Trent's interactions with others as well. He found himself being more thoughtful and less quick to make snap judgments about people he didn't know well. He started listening more and speaking less, realizing that everyone had their own unique story to tell, and that there was often more to people than met the eye. The haven of Harmony Creek, through the unexpected revelation of Eleanor's past, was teaching Trent a valuable lesson about empathy, respect, and the importance of looking beyond the surface. The rhythm of life in Harmony Creek settled back into its familiar pace as summer gave way to the warm hues of autumn. However, the quiet tranquility of the town now held a subtle but significant undercurrent of change, largely centered around the unassuming figure of Eleanor Ainsworth. The revelation of her past as Whisper, the legendary military sniper, had not only surprised the community, but had also forged a new level of respect and admiration for the elderly woman who had quietly lived among them for so many years. Eleanor, while still cherishing her solitude and the simple pleasures of her garden and her books, found a new sense of connection with her neighbors. The once polite but somewhat distant interactions had blossomed into genuine friendships. The conversations now enriched by shared stories and a mutual understanding of the depth of Eleanor's life experiences. She was no longer just Mrs. Ainsworth, the widow of the town doctor. She was Eleanor, a woman who had witnessed history, possessed remarkable skills, and carried a quiet strength that inspired everyone she met. The young people who had become her students at the makeshift shooting range continued to visit her regularly. Their shooting skills had improved significantly under her patient guidance. But more importantly, they had learned invaluable lessons about humility, respect, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. They often stopped by simply to chat, seeking her advice on various matters, treating her not just as a mentor, but as a trusted friend. Trent, in particular, had undergone a noticeable transformation. His earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness and a genuine respect for Eleanor and the wisdom she imparted. The upcoming Founders' Day celebration held a special significance that year. While Eleanor still preferred to avoid the spotlight, the town insisted on acknowledging her service in a meaningful way. During the official program, Mr. Abernathy, with Eleanor's reluctant permission, shared a brief account of her wartime heroism. His words met with a heartfelt standing ovation from the entire community. Eleanor, sitting quietly in the audience, felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of finally being truly seen and appreciated for all that she was. Life in her little cottage continued peacefully. The gentle creak of the porch swing, a familiar sound against the backdrop of Harmony Creek's quiet charm. But now, there was a subtle difference. When neighbors greeted her, their smiles held a deeper meaning, their eyes reflecting not just kindness, but a profound respect. Children would sometimes stop by her garden, not just to admire her flowers, but to ask her about her stories, their young minds eager to learn from the quiet woman who had once been a silent guardian. Eleanor Ainsworth, the unassuming old lady of Harmony Creek, had finally been embraced for the entirety of her remarkable story. Her past, once a hidden secret, had become a source of pride and inspiration for the community. She lived out her days surrounded by a quiet admiration and genuine affection, a testament to the enduring power of truth, the importance of looking beyond appearances, and the profound respect that can blossom when a community truly comes to know the quiet heroes living among them. The haven of Harmony Creek had, in the end, offered Eleanor not just a place to live, but a place to truly belong.